Will you please stand for the reading of the gospel? Hear now the word of the Lord. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is the richest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air can come and make nests in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a yeast that a woman took and mixed with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy he goes and sells all he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down and put good into the baskets and threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all of this? They answered yes. And he said to them, therefore every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household, who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. So, I've told you before, I didn't grow up going to church. It wasn't until I was about 17 years old that I started going to church with Julie. But I lived in Mississippi, so I was surrounded by church people. I was surrounded by church and Jesus and, very, very much a Christ-haunted landscape, if you will. And but not going to church, this is kind of what I thought of church as a kid not going to church. I thought of church as the place where all the good people went. The place where all the good people go on Wednesdays and Sundays. The good people. The people who dressed up in their Sunday best. The people who carried their Bible with them everywhere they went. The people who didn't smoke, drink, or cuss. The people who were good American citizens. That was my image of the church from a kid who wasn't churched. And so when I was a kid, if Jesus had asked me what the kingdom of heaven looked like, I might have said, well, it looks like the people who go to church. And I would have said that seriously. And I think that's how most of us think of the kingdom of heaven. We kind of think of the kingdom of heaven, it's where all the good people are. It's the place. There are no bad people in the kingdom of heaven. There are no bad things in the kingdom of heaven. And it's a comforting thought. I like that thought. We all like to think of the kingdom of heaven as a place, a kingdom where everything is good, everything is perfect, everything is orderly and pure and good and right and just. In this reading today, it's so interesting. We have this series of short one-liner parables. You saw them. Kingdom of heaven is like this. The kingdom of heaven is like this. The kingdom of heaven is like this. But here's the thing. There's nothing in these parables where Jesus describes the kingdom of heaven about good people. Wearing nice clothes, carrying a Bible, refraining from smoking, drinking, cussing. In fact, there's nothing in these parables, in these series of kingdom parables, that even talks about being a good person. Nothing. So first, Jesus says, the very first parable, and if you want to read with me, it might be helpful for you to just kind of follow along, but this first parable, it's right here in the very first verse, 31. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone sowed in his field. It's the smallest of seeds. It's very insignificant, but that mustard seed grows up into this huge shrub where even the birds have room to nest. We love the mustard seed analogy. I can't tell you how many little mustard seeds have been brought up at children's moments in churches over the years. We like that idea of something so insignificant growing into something big. That's a church growth analogy. That's what we want, our little tiny church to grow. We want to become the mustard shrub. We love it. We love that analogy, that illustration. Here's the problem with loving it too much. We have a positive view of the mustard seed. Right? We have a positive view. Because Jesus told us, even if we have faith that small, we can do big things. So we love the mustard seed analogy. But to the hearers of Jesus, when he was telling this in real time, they would not have had a positive view of the mustard shrub or the mustard seed at all. They would have recoiled at this analogy because the mustard shrub was more of a nuisance in Jesus' day. It was more like a bothersome weed. So like if you have one of those mustard shrubs near your farm, well, look, remember what Jesus says? He says that's where the birds nest. If you have that, you don't want that near your farm. You don't want a place where the birds can hang out right next to your farm. So the ancient farmer hearing this parable would just soon burn down that mustard shrub than to use it as an analogy for the kingdom of heaven. And then Jesus says in the next parable, the kingdom of heaven is like a yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. Here's another great church growth analogy. You know, the leavened bread growing up, this small flour, and it grows up. And the problem with that one as a positive analogy is that leaven was almost always considered unclean or even evil back in Jesus' day. What kind of bread was used for Passover? Unleavened bread. Not leavened bread because it was not considered to be clean. And this is why. Because in order to make something leavened, you had to spoil a little piece of bread. You had to spoil it just enough to be useful for future leavening. And if you spoil it too much, it causes food poisoning. So leaven back then could be fatal. It wasn't necessarily seen as a positive image, but yet Jesus uses this image that people would recoil at as an image of the kingdom of heaven. Then Jesus says next, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, and someone found it, and they hid it. Then in his joy, he goes and he sells everything he has to buy the field. And so think about it. This guy is rooting around trying to find treasure in a field he doesn't own. That sounds like a thief to me. Now he makes it right. He goes and eventually buys it, but not after he sneakily gets in there and finds its value, hides it so the owner can't see it, and then goes and buys it. So he's not such a great guy. Again, another disagreeable image of the kingdom of heaven we've got. Jesus says again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, and on finding one pearl of great price, he went and sold all he had and bought it. We love these parables. I mean, the pearl of great price, all you got to do is say it, and everybody knows what you're talking about. But here's the problem again, not a great image for a hearer in Jesus' day, because merchants were not viewed favorably. They were viewed more like used car salesmen. Now, apologies to anyone who ever sold used cars. I'm not really sure how used car salesmen got the bad rap, but you can understand that this merchant was not viewed favorably. And it's so strange. Jesus has all these one after another machine gun. Kingdom of heaven's like this, like this, like this. And we have these images of the kingdom of heaven as this pristine, clean place. Nothing disagreeable about it, nothing spoiled, no bad actors, nothing threatening. And Jesus uses some pretty disagreeable things to make his point about the kingdom of heaven and what it's like. And for us, like if he was standing here telling us these parables, these are the analogies he might use. The kingdom of heaven is like the telephone scammer that constantly calls you all day, every day. If Jesus stood here and started a parable like that, we'd all be going, ugh. The kingdom of heaven is like that. Or maybe this one. The kingdom of heaven is like calling customer support and being asked to press 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 repeatedly. And when you finally get to the right department, you wait 45 minutes before you talk to someone. Or my wife would love this one. The kingdom of heaven is like the guy who comes, pulls out in front of you, and goes 10 miles under the speed limit for 10 miles. You know, Jesus, it was that kind of thing. Jesus was using these images nobody liked. It's like he's trying to shock his audience into using analogies that people wouldn't have a good feeling about. The mustard shrub, the leaven, the thief, the merchant. And of course, the religious leaders couldn't have thought much of any of these analogies because they were the good guys. They were the orderly ones. They were the pious ones. They were the ones dressed up in their Sunday best, wearing their religion on their sleeve. And they probably wouldn't think highly of a parable extolling leavened bread, mustard shrubs, a thief, or a merchant. But I've said this before, and it's so important if you read the parables. We don't often read the parables like Jesus intended them. We read the parables like good sermon illustrations. Like I stand up here and I have a sermon and I tell a folksy story and everybody goes, okay, I get what he's saying. That wasn't the reason he told it. And in fact, it's kind of crazy at the end of this. Jesus says, have you understood all this? And they say, yes. It is not likely that they did. But he told the parables to wake people up, to see the world differently. He uses these images, these shocking images and analogies to get people's attention and to get them to think a little bit more deeply than surface level thinking. The worst thing we do with the parable of the Good Samaritan is make it into a parable about being a good neighbor. It's way more than that. Mostly the response to Jesus' parables back then was, what's he talking about? And what we know about Jesus is he spent his time saying in some pretty disagreeable things to people, doing some pretty disagreeable things to people, rather than hanging out with the esteemed church leaders. They thought that he drank too much, he ate too much, he hung out with the wrong people, the most disagreeable people. According to them, he was not one of those good people. To those good people, he was a most disagreeable person, and he was never shy about calling the good people hypocrites or blind or fools. Even once called them a bunch of snakes. Why would we want someone like that in our church? But finally, in the reading, we get to this last parable. Jesus gives us another image of the kingdom of heaven. He says, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea, and it caught fish of every kind. And when it was full, they drew it ashore, they sat down, they put it into good baskets, and they threw out the bad stuff. And so it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the evil from the righteous, throw them into the furnace of fire, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, here's the part where we got to go deeper. Because if you read that parable like it's written here, there's way more there that the translators do not do this justice. And pretty much every scholar that I know, and I don't understand why they do it, but they do it. But you got to get into the Greek. So, the Greek word for net in this reading is sagane, S-A-G-A-N-E. It is the only time in the New Testament that this kind of net is mentioned. Every other time in the New Testament, when it says net, it's talking about a throw net that you throw out in the sea and you bring it in and you catch fish. Sagane in this parable is a dragnet. You drag this net across the bottom of the seafloor. Across the bottom of the seafloor. And we all know when you drag a net across the bottom of the sea, you're going to pull up all kinds of junk. You're going to pull up all kinds of stuff that you don't want, not just seafood. You might get some of that. And it's odd because the translators say he threw the net in and pulled up fish of every kind. In the Greek, fish is not there. It is nowhere in the Greek. The translators almost uniformly make a leap and assume that he's talking about the dragnet pulls up fish of every kind. It never says it. And it's unfortunate because it makes all the difference here in this parable. It says, basically, the kingdom of heaven's like a net that was thrown into the sea, and it gathers every kind of thing. Every kind of thing, not every kind of fish, every kind of thing. The translators assume he meant fish. But if you assume that, you change the dynamic of the parable completely. It's just not there. So Jesus tells us all these parables where he uses disagreeable things to tell us what the image of the kingdom of heaven is like. And when you drag a net across the bottom of the sea floor, you're going to pull up all kinds of disagreeable things. You may only get junk. I lived on a bayou in Mississippi. Grew up in Fort Bayou, and you know, it was probably took me 1 minute to walk to the edge of the bayou. And we swam in the bayou. We swam with all kinds of disagreeable and dangerous things. I don't know what we're thinking. I'd never do it now. But we used to go blue crabbing a lot. And we would put these baskets down, and then we would pull them up, and it would suction up all kinds of things. Most of the time, it was bottle caps or cans or just junk people put down or seaweed. We might get some little shrimp we couldn't eat, or maybe even some little blue crabs. But every once in a while, that big old blue crab. And oftentimes we kill it on the spot and eat it there. We brought our own matches and stuff, and I don't know how healthy that was, but I'm living. And Jesus said the kingdom of heaven's like that, a dragnet. And what he's saying is the kingdom of heaven's like this dragnet that catches not only agreeable things, but disagreeable things. That is the shocking part of Jesus' parable. And if it's just fish, it's not shocking anymore. He's saying the kingdom of heaven is full of agreeable and the disagreeable. And I think the message here is if you are going to miss the kingdom of heaven, if you're looking for the kingdom of heaven, you're going to miss it if you're only looking for the good people, the orderly people, the pure people, the talented, the beautiful people, the spiritual people. And you might be thinking, well, Chuck, at the end of the parable, it says all the good and bad get sorted. What about that? Well, let's talk about the net again. The net doesn't discriminate or judge, right? When it drags across the floor, it's not discriminating or judging. It's just gathering everything. Everything in its path it gathers. It does not judge. As it drags across the floor, it just gathers. It only gathers. It does not judge. And isn't that what the church is about? Isn't that who we are? We are the dragnet. The church is the dragnet. And you might say that gathering is the principal act of the church. It's why it's so heartbreaking that people who still claim to be Christians don't even go to church anymore, because gathering is that central act. We gather every Sunday. We gather people into Christ and the church. We are the dragnet. We are Sagene. You are Sagene. And we could discriminate. We could sort. We could judge as we gather. We could pick and choose, and many churches have done that, from the agreeable and disagreeable. Sadly, the first church I was pointed to out of seminary was infamous for keeping the disagreeable out. And another church I pastored wanted to kick out people who practiced disagreeable lifestyles. So the church hasn't always operated as a dragnet. It's often operated as the sorter. But the sorting doesn't happen until the angels come and Jesus takes care of it. And when we Christians, when we practice that kind of sorting and discriminating and judging, it may say more about our self-awareness than anything, because maybe we just don't realize how disagreeable we are. I know that when I am guilty of judging someone, and I have done it and I do it, I am at heart forgetting how disagreeable I am. We are the dragnet. The church is the dragnet. And no one in our dragnet should be judged by how disagreeable they look, or how disagreeable they act, or how disagreeable we think they are, because in our own way we're all disagreeable to some, or else we wouldn't need confession. And we'll gather this fall all kinds of people. Maybe there's people who come through our doors that maybe we find disagreeable, how they live their life. But it's not our call. It's only our call to drag. And maybe they never show up inside these doors on this hour. but we're still gathering them. In fact, I think that's the most important part of what we're going to do as a food pantry in our church is not give them food, but we're dragging the net. We're dragging it wide. And if you have been gathered in the dragnet, you are saved. Everyone at the end of the age everyone at the end of the age who's in that dragnet has been saved, has been drug up from the bottom of the sea, the bottom of the floor, and has been rescued and made righteous by the blood of the cross. Everyone in the dragnet has been saved. So then what would make some of them so disagreeable that the angels would toss them out? If everyone in the dragnet has been saved by just being gathered, what would make them so disagreeable that the angels would sort them? There's only one thing that makes us disagreeable to Christ, and that's when we are disagreeable to his grace. Grace that has drug all of us up from the depths of the sea. There's only one thing that makes us disagreeable to his grace. When we think that we are good enough not to need it. Let us take a moment of silence.